All right, so maybe we could just start with you introducing yourself quickly.
Sure.
Who you
Yeah,
are,
my
what you
name's
do.
absolutely. My name's Jared Mofat. I'm the state campaigns director for the Marijuana Policy Project, which is a national organization working to end cannabis prohibition and reform cannabis laws.
Okay, I just wanted to get into the policy making actual process of it. I was curious, who are the main stakeholders in this, like the process of it, and were there any like major opposition to this initiative, like many like major groups or anything?
Yeah, so the drafting process was mainly done by a group called, New Approach Montana. I think it was called the 406 Coalition before. And that was led by Pepper Peterson and Ted Dick, who essentially, came to us, but also did a listening tour throughout Montana. So they brought sort of their proposals to different town halls and folks in the medical industry, but also local lawmakers, different nonprofit organizations, and sort of collected all this feedback about what would work best for Montana. So that was combined with again some national attorneys that we work with that help with the language around common things that need to be included in any cannabis legalization law. So it was sort of those two components that came together to produce I-190.
Okay, and there wasn't too much major opposition, like no major groups, more just individuals.
Right. There was opposition once the campaign sort of ramped up. There's one person in particular, I think his name's Steve Zabawa, who has kind of led the opposition for a number of years. And but in the drafting process, there wasn't really much interaction with an opposition at that time. It was really once we had qualified for the ballot, they had, I forget what their campaign name was. I was like no on I-190, I think. So there was a bit of a opposition campaign that we had to contend with in the months leading up to the election.
Okay, yeah. Is Montana's policy, is it similar to other states that it kind of copy other states? Like, is the 20% tax, is that a normal number?
There's not really a normal rate. I mean, that each state has kind of taken its own unique approach. I would say that yes, the 20% is definitely on par with the overall rate. Some states tax not by price, but by weight. Other states do it by potency. So there's different models, but yeah, 20% is very much sort of in the lower end actually of tax rates compared to other states. I think the only other state that has a lower rate would be Michigan, which is I think 16%. But yeah, most other states are in that range. The highest is Washington, which is somewhere around in the 40s, depending on, there's different levels of taxation. So that's pretty steep. But yeah, pretty standard in terms of the home grow provisions. That was pretty, that's in most laws. The way that the industry is sort of regulated in terms of packaging and product regulations and the different types of licenses, that's all pretty standard. So I would say that Montana is not an outlier in any particular way. Although again, I think there were certain things that, again, like a lower tax rate was definitely something that was felt to be appropriate for a state like Montana, which is typically more tax averse. So
That makes sense. Could you go into detail of the policy implementation process and like how it's going to happen?
yeah, this is not an area that I know very much about, to be honest with you, because I haven't been, since the campaign, I haven't been directly involved in the implementation process. I can just sort of speak generally about how things unroll or roll out in other states. So there's going to be, the legislature right now is, at least the last update I got, is still sort of working out the details, and the governor's office is involved in sort of implementing I-190 because it's a statutory initiative. The lawmakers have the ability to change certain things. Particularly there's a debate around how the revenue is going to be allocated, but once all that is settled, then the regulators will have sort of their final statute, and it'll be up to them to start writing more specific rules, applications for businesses to apply for licenses. So the way to think of it is, every state has a state constitution, which sort of reigns supreme, and that was what 118 was about, right? We needed to reform the Constitution to allow for a legal age of 21. And then below that, you have sort of the general laws or the general statutes, which is what the legislature approves, and then what also I-190 was, a statutory initiative where the voters act as sort of the legislature. And then below that, you have administrative rules or executive rules that the executive branch of the government writes, not as laws, but as ways to implement the laws. So you can think of the I-190 as sort of a general framework, and what's going to now happen in the next, the rest of the year essentially is the regulators tasked with overseeing the program will be writing very detailed rules about every aspect of how these businesses are going to have to operate, and the requirements for how they pay taxes, how they design their building facilities, how they again design their products and package those products. So there's a lot of details that aren't spelled out in the law that are going to be spelled out in rules and regulations. And so once that's done, those will include, I believe the bill, the I-190 does say, I'm forgetting the exact date, but there is a date by which they have to have, these applications approved and actual licenses in the hands of business owners so that sales can begin. So that'll be, that general time frame provides sort of a timeline of how things will unfold.
All right, so now we will move on to my alternative policy section of the video. In total, I do believe that Initiative 190 is a good policy change that I do not have any major complaints with. However, if I did have to nitpick something, it would be with the implementation process. I do not agree with Governor Gianforte wanting to change who receives the tax revenue from what the citizens of Montana voted on Election Day in the fall. I do agree with Gianforte that addiction is a significant issue for the state, but the citizens of Montana voted for Initiative 190 with the promise that the revenue raised was going to go to environmental conservation and veteran services groups. If it were up to me, I would push the current version of I-190 through the Montana legislation that the people voted on in the fall. I believe that this is the best course of action because if this new law does not go into effect because of revenue allocation disagreements, it will hurt all groups involved as nobody would receive funding from the tax revenue. If funding for addiction recovery is the only way the Republican-controlled state government will not contest the implementation of this policy change, then I would possibly suggest raising the tax level from 20 to 25%. I would do this so the extra 5% would go to addiction recovery. This way, the original groups that the citizens voted on in the fall would still get their funding that was promised. As we learned in the interview, 20% is actually a relatively low number for marijuana taxation rates. So, jumping from 20 to 25% would not be something that's that crazy. Ideally, however, the original version of Initiative 190 that the citizens voted on will go through on schedule instead. I do believe that Initiative 190 is a good policy change for the state of Montana, and I do hope that Montana could act as a role model for other states that have not yet legalized marijuana. Thank you for watching.